heavy and developing leg strength, because if you crank up the springs really heavy, you'll end up with a sore back trying to hold the body. The back muscles will be going bananas trying to hold the legs against the spring tension, and in fact you get off feeling compressed, backache, disgusting. It's not about that, okay? So it's not about putting more springs on. Conversely, if you don't put enough spring on, so if you put really light springs on, it's providing no support for you. You might as well be laying on the ground here doing this, because that's what it feels like. You've got no strength, no support, and it makes your core go bananas, and could also hurt your back because you can arch, okay? So the whole purpose of going, we're going to put feet in straps, is so that the person can move their ball and socket hip joint in as many different directions as possible in a far easier environment than this. Because this is hard, grippy, instantaneously I've compromised my freedom in my hips because it's bloody hard. Take that bit out, I swear. Alright. I would choose very medium springs, something like a blue and a yellow, a white. It depends on the person. Candy's legs, Candy's long, swooping legs, probably weigh slightly less than mine. So if I stick my legs in a blue and yellow spring, that's relatively speaking much lighter for my leg, bone, quad, muscle groups and everything than hers. So we're looking for a spring that suits the individual, and maybe for a female, average build, blue and yellow, something around that white region. If you've got a guy who's a bit bigger, a bit bulkier, sportier person with big leg muscles, you might have to go up to a white and yellow, something like that. But you're looking for a spring that feels nice and nothing, nice and floaty. Okay? Lie the body down on your back, please. Amy. Here's my faithful assistant. Press out the legs on the foot bar. That's phase one of how to get into the springs. Then they can take a strap, you can give it to them, they can take it, whatever. Bend a leg off and place your foot in the strap. So once your foot is in the strap there, keep the knee close to you, keep the foot close to you, and the carriage won't move. If you've got tension in that rope, it won't move when you take that leg off, even though the clients won't believe you. Because they'll think taking that leg off will cause movement, unless you tell them. What you don't want is this going on while they're trying to put that leg in the strap, because this one will pull them over. Okay? So bear in mind that the person is straight, comfortable, neutral, comfortable. Then they can take the second leg off and they can put their foot in that strap. And then before they push out, before they do anything, get them into a neutral spine. Okay, so they don't want to be flat backed or overarched and then loading up. So get themselves to just fiddle around, get comfortable in their pelvis, and then their tummy's on, they're going to press their two legs out together to a sort of middle of the roadie angle, 45 degrees-ish. So it's not up, excuse me, and it's not out low, it's in between. Now if the springs are about right, when you let go, they should kind of sit there.
They're a bit light.
Bit light?
Yeah.
Bend the knees back in again. And do exactly what I said, don't do it. Change the springs while you're on there. Press down now. So if that happened in the exam, you probably would say, do you know what, take your feet out, I'll change it. Just for the purposes of that. In reality, I'll pull that on and change it like that, but it's not the lightest spring in the world, so you might find that it's not that easy to pull those springs. Safer to get them off or to take their feet out of the straps and reposition. So if it's too light, you'll see these hip flexors, rec fen, quad group, all gripping. See how Amy's are off? They're just sitting there, it's just hanging. Okay? If it's too heavy, the hammies and the back will be trying to stop her legs shooting over her head. So you want to watch that and make sure that it feels okay and get feedback. What does it feel like? Okay? Mid-range, neither low nor high, mid-rangey, nice and easy. So from here, you've taught the person neutral spine already, because if you haven't, they shouldn't be on here anyway. They have to maintain their neutral spine whilst they do all of the different exercises. And effectively, circles, little box, frogs, up, downs, openings, they're all just different shapes with your legs, whilst your focus is holding the pelvis in neutral. It works, different muscle groups, of course, but the point is, can you maintain that stability through your training? So the first one, number 72, is leg lowers. Double leg lowers, ups and downs. So you let the legs come up on the in-breath, and you pull the legs back down on the out-breath.
Are you working on glutes to try and pull them down? Or like what's your focus? What are you cueing?
For the way down, I would be cueing, in reality they're getting hamstrings mainly, because they're in that flexion before they get glute. You might want to cue a little bit of glute just to help them use the glutes. But glutes don't do primary... Like I recommend you want to be focusing on the core, so cueing a bit of glute and a bit of abs is good. But in reality, what's the prime mover when your hips are flexed to bring you down? It's hamstring.
Should the feet be in turnout?
The feet can be in turnout or parallel, it depends on the individual.
This will add more adductors.
That gives you a bit more adductors and a bit more glutes and a bit of external rotator.
Yeah.
Parallel is not a bad thing because it'll give you that medial hamstring.
Yeah.
And get you to stop biasing those outside bits. I like to do it in parallel. It depends on the individuals. If the person always does it in parallel, mix it up.
But if it was for the hamstrings, ultimately
you'd want it to be straight.
Yeah.
So you're pulling down on the out-breath. It's a concentric patterning of the back of the hip, bit of glutes, hamstrings pulling down. And you use your abdominal muscles to stop the pelvis from anteriorly tilting. Make sense? There's no hip flexor movement. It's controlled by the back of the leg. On the way up, what pulls on the way back up? The springs are pulling you back up. So in theory, you're having to do eccentric work on the same muscle group to let the legs come back up. You shouldn't really be using any hip flexor, any tightening through the front. And if they are, I'd query whether the springs are a little bit lighter than they should be.
If they're too light, then they will.
If they're too light, then they'll want to lift their legs back up, and then they'll be using their anterior structures. So you should be going pull down on the out-breath, because that's when you need the abdominal support, because the pelvis will anteriorly tilt if you don't provide support. On the way back up, you're eccentrically lengthening the hammies. And in theory, you have to use a little bit of lumbar control to stop your pelvis posteriorly tilting. So there's no point sucking on plenty of abs on the way up, because in theory, your abs aren't going to hold your pelvis from flattening. So there's a sense of a little bit of involvement of these muscles. Don't grip in your low back, because you're not supposed to be feeling your low back. You're supposed to be focusing on your core. But you need to maintain the arch when the legs go up, and then you need to stop the arch getting bigger when the legs go down. It's nice and straight. It's in line with your nose and their nose, or their nose and their body, a line on the ceiling. Standing down this end, you can get a really good view of what's going on. People quite often will bias one way over the other. You'll see the legs drifting off to the side. Oh, this is not a really perfect way of laying it.
Funny.
Funny there.
Sometimes you teach people between the ankles.
Yes, you can. So if I put something between the ankles, what's that going to encourage them to do? More adductors. They're going to have to hold the ball there. So what happens when you have one leg touching the other is the weaker leg relies on the other leg for stability. So it might be that you say, actually, I'm going to take them slightly apart and then move them up and down, so that I'm definitely sure you're controlling both legs. Much harder, isn't it? But you're not relying one on the other one. It's okay to lean one into the other as long as they're both doing something. But if you've got a really dominant leg and a weak leg, I guarantee you're just going to go, use my good leg and rest my weak leg against it. And that's not what you want.
So should you be doing it at like hip width?
I'd do it together, but just make sure the person is pulling evenly through the straps. And you can't tell, because these are fixed straps, it's really hard to tell whether the person's biasing 60-40 in one way or another.
Yeah.
Some of the more snazzy reformers have got an independent rope, and you'll tell. Those gravity kind of reformers, you can tell a difference. So how low do you go?
As low as I can go without the back being on.
As low as you can go before you lose your lumbar pelvic stability. Do you want the person going as low as level or even lower than that? Not really. What's the point? Okay, I'd get them to come down to sort of maybe a tiny bit like that, sort of there. They don't need to even be going level. If they go down there into the springs, it's going to get messy. So what's the point? Okay, that's plenty of range. She's got herself pretty much to anatomically lined. On the way up, how far is she going to go on the way up?
As far as she can go without
As
losing
far as she
control.
can go before she loses her stability. So what would govern that?
Abs.
Hamstring flexibility relative to the pelvis control, right? So at some point, you're going to start to feel your hammies stretchy, and then there's going to be a little tug of war between your hamstrings pulling you into a what tilt? Posterior tilt, lifting your bum off in the air, pulling on your ischial tuber